You deserve a permanent vacation. The words, spoken by my daughter-in-law Chloe, were meant to be a balm, a sweet confection to celebrate my 70th year. But they hung in the climate-controlled air of the luxury sedan like a cheap air freshener, failing to mask something rotten underneath. Her hand was on mine, her nails perfectly manicured, a cool, smooth pressure that felt less like comfort and more like a warning. I turned from the window, from the blur of sun-drenched California suburbs, and looked at her. Her smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, wide and white and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a billboard smile, designed for public consumption. Beside me, my son Liam kept his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. He hadn't said much for the last 20 minutes, leaving the emotional labor to his wife, as he so often did. A permanent vacation, I repeated, my own voice sounding thin, foreign. That sounds expensive. Nothing is too expensive for you, Mom, Liam said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. After everything you did for Dad, for us, this is the least we can do. A real 5-star resort retreat. Our surprise. A surprise. My late husband Arthur had loved surprises, but his were a bottle of obscure French wine on a Tuesday, or first edition copies of my favorite books sourced from some dusty corner of the world. They were extensions of his love for me, intricate and thoughtful. This felt different. This felt rehearsed. I tried to settle back into the plush leather seat, to quell the unease coiling in my stomach. I was being ungrateful. My son and his wife were taking me somewhere special for my birthday. I should be happy. But ever since Arthur passed, happiness had become a distant shore. For the past 2 years, living with Liam and Chloe in the house Arthur and I had built, I had felt less like a mother and more like a piece of antique furniture they couldn't quite figure out where to place. They moved around me with a strained politeness, their hushed arguments in the hallways always stopping the moment I entered a room. I do hope I packed the right things, I said, a test. You both just told me to bring a small overnight bag. Oh, everything's taken care of, Freya, Chloe chirped, her hand squeezing mine again. They have everything you could possibly need, a full-service establishment. You won't have to lift a finger ever again. Ever again. The words echoed the finality of a closing door. We were leaving the familiar city limits now, heading into a part of the county I didn't recognize. The landscape was becoming flatter, more anonymous. Manicured lawns, identical houses, the kind of manufactured tranquility that always set my teeth on edge. Are we near the coast? I asked, thinking of the resorts Arthur and I used to frequent near Carmel, the scent of salt and eucalyptus in the air. Almost there, Liam said, his eyes flicking to the GPS on the dashboard. Chloe began to prattle on about the amenities. A heated pool, gourmet meals, a full schedule of activities. They have a book club, Freya. I remembered how much you used to love your book club. I did. I used to host it in our library, the scent of old paper and leather mixing with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. We'd argue about Faulkner and laugh over Wilde. But that club had dissolved after Arthur's diagnosis, my world shrinking to the size of his sickbed. Chloe spoke of a new book club as if it were an equivalent, a simple replacement for a life I had lost. She was offering me a photograph of a feast while I was starving. The unease in my gut was now a cold, hard knot. I felt a tremor of a memory. Arthur, his hand weak but warm in mine, his voice a rasp. They see the house, the money, he had whispered. They don't see you, Freya. They never have. They'll forget you're the architect of all of it. At the time, I had dismissed it as the paranoia of a dying man. Now, his words felt like a prophecy. The car slowed, turning onto a wide, tree-lined avenue. The trees were too perfect, the hedges trimmed with geometric precision. It felt sterile, like a hospital campus trying to disguise itself as a park. And then I saw it. Through a gap in the impossibly green hedge, a sign came into view. It was large, made of carved wood and what looked like polished brass. It wasn't the elegant script of a seaside resort. It was a friendly, looping font, a font designed to be non-threatening, reassuring. But the words it spelled out landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Golden years. Senior living. I read the words once, twice. My mind refused to connect them to my reality. This was a mistake. Liam had taken a wrong turn. This was a prank, a tasteless, cruel joke. I turned to look at him, to see the laughter in his eyes, to hear him say, "Got you, Mom," and then drive on to the real destination. But there was no laughter. There was only the grim set of his jaw as he pulled the car smoothly into a parking space directly in front of the main entrance. Chloe's smile was gone, replaced by a look of strained pity, the kind of look you give a stray animal before you call the pound. "Liam?" My voice was a fragile thing, a thread of sound. He finally turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw not malice, but something far worse, the weary justification of a man who has convinced himself that a monstrous act is, in fact, a kindness. "Mom, we had to," he began, the opening line of a speech he had clearly practiced. "You haven't been yourself. The doctor agrees. You're confused sometimes. You forget things. This big house, it's too much for you. We were so worried." "The doctor?" I stammered. "What doctor?" "We found a specialist," Chloe supplied, her voice soft and treacherous. "He made a home visit last week, remember? You thought he was here to fix the air conditioning." I remembered a man in a suit. I had been in the garden. He had asked me some simple questions. The date. The name of the president. I had answered them, feeling irritated at the intrusion. I thought he was a salesman. My son had stood behind him, nodding. The car door beside me opened, clicked open by Chloe. It wasn't the salty air of the coast that greeted me. It was a wave of something else. The cloying, institutional scent of disinfectant, overcooked cabbage, and a faint, underlying sweetness of decay. It was the scent of despair, chemically treated and served on a schedule. "Come on, Freya," Chloe said, her hand now on my elbow, gently but firmly pulling me out of the car. "Let's get you settled in for your party." My legs felt like stone. I stood on the pavement, looking at the beige, sprawling building with its wide, tinted windows that reflected the sky but revealed nothing of what was inside. An automatic door hissed open, and I saw a glimpse of a floral-patterned sofa, a television bolted high on a wall, and the slow, shuffling gait of a resident pushing a walker. This wasn't a resort. This wasn't a retreat. This was a warehouse for the old and unwanted. Liam was opening the trunk. He pulled out the small overnight bag I had packed. Then he pulled out 2 more large suitcases. My suitcases, packed with my clothes, my things. They had done this behind my back, going through my closets, my drawers, my life, sorting and packing me away like winter clothing. You can't," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. The shock was a sheet of ice, encasing me, numbing my limbs, freezing my rage before it could even form. I looked from my son's averted face to my daughter-in-law's mask of compassion. "It's for the best," Liam said, not looking at me, placing my luggage on the curb. "We can finally sell the house, get you the best care. You'll be safe here." Safe. The word was a parody. I had never felt less safe in my entire life. Chloe leaned in, her perfume cloying and suffocating. She kissed my cheek. It was as cold as a stone. "We'll visit every week," she promised. "We love you so much." They got back in the car. I stood on the curb, next to my bags, a 70-year-old woman in a nice dress, ready for a birthday party that would never happen. I watched the expensive sedan pull away, its red taillights shrinking in the afternoon sun until they were just 2 angry pinpricks, and then nothing. The automatic door hissed open again. A woman in scrubs, with a clipboard and a practiced professional smile, stepped out. "Freya Nielsen, welcome to Golden Years. We've been expecting you." I looked at my suitcases, then at the building that loomed over me like a tomb. They hadn't brought me here for a party. This wasn't a celebration. It was a disposal. "My name is Freya. I am 70 years old. The woman who stares back at me from the small streaked mirror in this room is a stranger. Her eyes are wide with a shock that has not yet settled into the bones, her skin as pale and thin as the sheets on the narrow bed behind me. The air here smells of bleach and quiet despair, a scent that clings to the back of the throat. They call this place Golden Years. A name so dripping with false cheer it feels like a mockery. This room, This box of beige walls and synthetic fabrics is where my life is supposed to end. A life I gave away, piece by piece, for love. It wasn't always this way. There's a cheap, mass-produced print of a sunflower field tacked to the wall opposite my bed. The colors are garish, the perspective flat. It's an insult to art, and it makes my soul ache. Once my world was filled with real art. I was a curator at the City Museum, a respected one. I had a gift for it, an intuition. I could walk through a dusty antique shop and feel the pull of a forgotten masterpiece hidden under a pile of junk. I understood the language of color and shadow, the stories told in a single, confident brushstroke, or the agonizing texture of a sculptor's thumbprint left in the clay. My life had a rhythm then. The quiet reverence of the galleries in the morning, the scent of old canvas and oil paint, the thrill of acquisition, of bringing a piece of history into the light. I was building a legacy, one that was entirely my own. And then I met Arthur. He wasn't like the artists or patrons I knew. He didn't speak the language of aesthetics. He spoke in algorithms and binary, a dialect of pure logic that was both dazzling and isolating. Arthur was a software architect, a reclusive genius who saw the world as a grand, intricate system waiting to be optimized. When he looked at a crowd, he didn't see faces. He saw data points, nodes in a network. He was brilliant, impossibly so, but he moved through the world like a visitor from another planet, baffled by social cues and utterly incapable of small talk. I was his interpreter, his bridge to the rest of humanity. When he tried to explain his ideas, his mind moved so fast his words would tangle and fall apart. But I could see the cathedral of logic he was building behind his eyes. I understood. Our first date was a disaster by any normal standard. He took me to a stark, minimalist coffee shop and spent 20 minutes explaining the inefficiency of the barista's workflow. But I wasn't listening to the words. I was watching the passion that lit up his face, the way his hands moved as if sculpting his ideas from the air. I saw the artist in the engineer. And I fell in love not with the man he was, but with the supernova of potential he carried inside him. He asked me to marry him a year later, not with a poem, but with a piece of code he'd written that generated a unique fractal pattern based on the day we met. He said, "Statistically, the probability of me finding someone who makes my own system run more efficiently was infinitesimal. You are an anomaly, Freya, a beautiful, perfect anomaly." It was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. Soon after, Liam was born, our son, and Arthur's work was consuming him. His ideas were getting bigger, more complex. He was on the verge of something revolutionary, working from a makeshift office in our garage, surrounded by humming servers and scrawled-on whiteboards. But the world kept intruding. Bills, parent-teacher conferences, ringing phones, the simple, grinding logistics of daily life. They were like static, interfering with his signal. I saw him fraying at the edges, his genius being chipped away by 1,000 tiny distractions. So I made a choice. It wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, quiet turning. I saw two legacies I could build, the one on the museum walls, a testament to my own eye, or the one humming in the garage, a testament to his mind. I couldn't have both. A masterpiece needs the right frame, the right light, the right environment to be truly seen. I decided my new project, my greatest curation, would be Arthur. I resigned from the museum. I packed away my catalogs and my tailored suits, and I stepped into a new role. I became the silent partner in the enterprise of our life. I was the firewall that protected him from the world. I managed the finances. I raised our son. I built a home that was a sanctuary of calm and order, a place where his mind could be free to fly. When investors needed to be wooed, I hosted the dinners. I would translate Arthur's dense, technical brilliance into a language they could understand, smoothing over his social awkwardness with grace and a well-timed story. They left charmed by me, but convinced by him. It was a perfect partnership. I was the foundation, unseen beneath the ground, but everything he built rested upon me. The billion-dollar software empire that grew out of that garage was as much my creation as his. He knew it. He never let me forget it. He called me his anchor, his true north. When the doctor gave us the diagnosis, the world tilted on its axis. The brilliant, orderly mind I had dedicated my life to protecting was being unraveled from the inside by a cruel, random disease. The last few years were a blur of hushed conversations, hospital visits, and a profound, aching grief that began long before he was actually gone. The mansion, once a bustling hub of our life, grew quiet. The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. After Arthur passed, that silence became a physical presence. It filled the cavernous halls, clung to the heavy velvet curtains, and pooled in the empty chair across from me at the dinner table. The house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a mausoleum. I was rattling around in it, a relic from another era. That was when Liam and his wife, Chloe, made their proposal. "Mom, you can't stay here alone," Liam said, his voice thick with a concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's too much for you." Chloe, ever the performer, put her arm around my shoulder. Her touch felt cold. "We're so worried, Freya. We want to be here, to take care of you. Let us move in. We can be a family again." I was drowning in grief, exhausted down to my very soul. The idea of not being alone, of having the noise of life return to the silent halls, was a lifeline. I trusted them. He was my son, Arthur's son. I said yes. It started subtly. First, it was just suggestions. Chloe, a self-styled interior designer with a popular Instagram account, would walk through a room and say things like, "This armchair is a bit dated, don't you think? It's weighing down the energy of the space." A week later, Arthur's favorite reading chair, the one with the worn leather arms that still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco, would be gone, replaced by something stark and white and uncomfortable. My things, our things, began to disappear, moved to the attic, or donated to a good cause, replaced by their cold, minimalist aesthetic. The house was slowly being stripped of its memories, of me. The next step was the finances. It was a calculated campaign of manufactured concern. "Mom, you forgot to pay the water bill again," Liam would say, holding up a letter. "Don't worry, I took care of it." Or Chloe would sigh dramatically. "Oh, Freya, the accountant called. He said you missed your quarterly tax payment." "It's all so complicated. You shouldn't have to deal with this while you're grieving." They were small lies, tiny seeds of doubt planted in my own mind. Was I getting forgetful? Was the grief making me incompetent? I was so tired. The day they sat me down in Arthur's study was the day the trap snapped shut. They had a lawyer with them, a slick young man with a plastic smile who worked for Chloe's father. Piles of documents were spread across the mahogany desk where Arthur had signed the contracts that built our empire. "It's just to make things simpler, Mom," Liam explained, avoiding my gaze. "A joint family trust. We'll manage everything, all the investments, the properties, the bills. You won't have to worry about a thing." The lawyer chimed in, his voice smooth as oil. "Given your fragile emotional state and recent lapses, it's the most prudent course of action. It protects the estate." It protects you. Fragile emotional state. They used my love for my husband, my grief at his loss, as a weapon against me. They made it sound like a diagnosis. I looked at my son, searching for the little boy I had raised, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees. I saw only a stranger, his face a mask of anxious greed. I was exhausted. I didn't have the strength to fight, to even question. I just wanted the conversation to be over. I picked up the pen. With a few strokes, the fortune Arthur and I had built together was no longer mine. My access to my own life was replaced by a weekly allowance. Every Friday, Chloe would hand me an envelope with a few $100s in cash. "Here you go," she'd say with a bright, patronizing smile. "For your groceries and little things." The first time I had to ask my son for money to pay the gardener who had tended our roses for 20 years, the humiliation burned like acid. I had become a ghost in my own home. I would walk the halls, and Liam and Chloe would talk around me, through me, as if I wasn't there. I'd hear them on the phone, laughing, making plans, spending my money on lavish trips and designer clothes. They hosted parties in my home, with my friends, or people who used to be my friends, who would give me a pitying glance before being swept away by Chloe's loud, performative charm. I was a queen in a castle I no longer ruled, a prisoner with the illusion of freedom. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my past, my present, and, as I now sat in this sterile room at Golden Years, it was clear they had come for my future too. They weren't just erasing me from the house, they were erasing me from the world. Life at Golden Years was a slow death administered in tasteless, lukewarm spoonfuls. It wasn't the overt cruelty of a Dickensian workhouse. It was something far more modern and insidious. It was the cruelty of neglect, of bureaucratic indifference, a slow, methodical erasure of the person I had once been. The air itself was a thief, smelling of weak disinfectant, boiled cabbage, and the faint, funereal scent of lavender air freshener, failing to mask the underlying odor of decay. It was the smell of a place where people came to be forgotten. The silence was the worst part. A thick, syrupy silence, broken only by the squeak of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes on the linoleum, the distant, mindless drone of a television in the common room, or the rattling, wet cough of a neighbor down the hall. It was a silence that seeped into your bones, making you feel as though you had already been buried. But the true horror, the meticulously crafted centerpiece of my suffering, arrived every Tuesday afternoon at precisely 2 o'clock. Tuesday was Chloe's day. It was performance day. I would hear her before I saw her, her voice echoing down the hall, a pitch too high, too bright for this muted gray world. "Hello, Carol. You're looking lovely today. Hi, John. That sweater is so handsome." She treated the staff like adoring fans, bestowing cheap compliments like royal blessings. They, in turn, would straighten their uniforms, their tired faces momentarily animated. Chloe had a way of making people feel seen, as long as the camera was rolling. She would burst into my room, not with the quiet consideration of a visitor, but with the chaotic energy of a director arriving on set. "Freya, there's my favorite mother-in-law," she'd chirp, placing a small, pristine box from a trendy bakery on my bedside table. It always contained a single, perfect-looking pastry, a vibrant splash of color in my beige existence. It was a prop, and I was the co-star. "All right, let's get you sitting up. A little more to the light, dear." "We want everyone to see that beautiful face," she'd command, physically maneuvering my chair so the bleak afternoon sun hit it just right. She never touched me directly if she could help it. She would push the chair, her manicured nails tapping on the vinyl armrest, a sound like a tiny, impatient woodpecker. Her own 5-year-old son, Aiden, would trail behind her, looking bored and clutching a tablet. Then came the phone. She'd prop it up on a stack of my unread books, her smile tightening as she framed the shot. "Okay, Aiden, sweetie, come give Grammy a little hug for the video. Just a quick one." The little boy, already a veteran of his mother's productions, would shuffle over and perform a stiff, awkward embrace, his cheek barely brushing against my papery skin before he retreated. He smelled of sugar and the clean, synthetic scent of his clothes. He never looked me in the eye. "Okay, everyone, we're live," Chloe would announce to the tiny lens. Her entire demeanor would shift. Her face would soften into a mask of beatific devotion, her voice dropping into a gentle, caring coo. "Hi, everyone. Just spending some quality time with Liam's wonderful mom, Freya. We brought her her favorite almond croissant. It's so important to make time for family, no matter how busy life gets." She'd then cut the pastry with a plastic knife, the flakes of almond and pastry falling onto the cardboard box. She'd hold a piece up to my lips. "Here you go, sweetie. Have a bite." I learned early on to play my part. I would take a small, hesitant bite, chewing slowly as she filmed. My throat would feel tight, each swallow a lump of dough and humiliation. The pastry always tasted of nothing but ash. I was a puppet, a prop in her curated narrative of the perfect, caring daughter-in-law. Her TikTok account, a shrine to her own perceived virtue, was filled with these little vignettes. The videos, tagged with #FamilyFirst, #ElderCare, #MakingMemories, and #daughter-in-law goals, would garner thousands of likes and gushing comments. "You are an angel," one would read. "Your mother-in-law is so lucky to have you," another would proclaim. They saw the saint she projected, not the artist of psychological torment who stood before me. "And how are we feeling today, Freya?" she'd ask, the camera still on us. I was supposed to say fine or good. Once in the beginning, I had tried to tell the truth. "I'm lonely, Chloe. The nights are very long." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went cold for a fraction of a second. "Oh, you old silly," she'd laughed, patting my hand for the camera. "You have so many friends here. We were just talking to Carol in the hall, and she says you're the life of the party." After the camera was off, she hissed at me, her voice a venomous whisper. "Don't you ever do that again. You will ruin everything. People want to see happy. They don't want to see a miserable old woman." So I learned to be silent. I learned to nod and smile weakly. I became a ghost at my own haunting. "Aiden, tell everyone what we're going to do for Grammy Freya's room," Chloe would prompt. Aiden, his eyes glued to his tablet, would recite his lines. "We're gonna buy you a new plant, Grammy." "That's right, sweetie," Chloe would beam at the phone. "Because a little bit of green can brighten up anyone's day. It's the little things that count." They never brought a plant. After 10 to 15 minutes, once she had enough footage for a week's worth of content, the performance would end. The phone would be pocketed. The bright, loving smile would vanish, replaced by a look of brisk impatience. "Well, that's that," she'd say, gathering her purse. "Aiden, say goodbye to your grandmother." "Bye, Grammy," he'd mumble, not looking up from his game. And then they would be gone. The echo of her high heels would fade down the hall, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier, more profound than before. On the bedside table, the remains of the pastry would sit in its box, a cold, greasy monument to my own irrelevance. The staff, their brief moment of excitement over, would go back to ignoring me. The warmth Chloe had feigned for her audience would be sucked out of the room, leaving it colder than ever. I was just Freya again. The woman in room 21B. A number, a file, a problem to be managed until it expired. I'd sit there, staring at the pastry until an orderly came to clear it away, clucking his tongue. "Shouldn't let good food go to waste," he'd say, not understanding that it had been poisoned long before it reached my lips. The weeks bled into one another, each a copy of the last, punctuated only by Chloe's Tuesday cruelties. Then came the autumn, and with it, the hollow promise of Thanksgiving. A part of me, a foolish, stubborn part that refused to die, held on to a sliver of hope. Maybe this time would be different. It was a holiday, a family holiday. The Wednesday before, Liam had called. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in over a month. It was brief, distant. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to wish you a happy Thanksgiving." Will you be coming by?" I asked, my voice a frail, hopeful thing. There was a pause. I could hear Chloe's muffled voice in the background, sharp and directing. We can't, Mom. Chloe's got this huge dinner planned, a real feast for all our friends. You know how she is, the perfect hostess. But we arranged a special dinner for you at the home. They're doing a whole thing, a party. We'll be thinking of you." A party. The word hung in the air after he disconnected. A beautiful, empty promise. Thanksgiving Day arrived not with a bang, but with the same slow gray dawn as any other day. There was no party. The special dinner was served at 4:30 in the afternoon in the common room, which had been listlessly decorated with a few paper turkeys taped to the walls. We were seated at our usual small, formica tables. There were no tablecloths. The feast consisted of a scoop of lumpy mashed potatoes from a box, a spoonful of unnaturally green beans from a can, and a gray, gelatinous slice of what they called turkey loaf. It had the texture of a sponge and tasted faintly of salt. It was all served on a paper plate with a plastic fork that bent if you pressed too hard. I sat alone, as I always did. The other residents ate in a similar silence, a collective of forgotten souls staring into their pathetic meals. The only sound was the scraping of plastic on paper and the ever-present drone of the television, which was playing a football game no one was watching. This was my party. This was my feast. I pushed the food around my plate, unable to swallow. The hope I'd harbored felt like a stone in my stomach. After a few minutes, I excused myself and shuffled back to the tomb of my room. I picked up the tablet Liam and Chloe had given me, a tool for my entertainment and connection, they'd said, though I knew it was mostly a way for them to monitor me. I opened the Instagram app, my thumb shaking slightly. And there it was. The first photo on Liam's feed was posted just minutes before. It was a wide shot of my dining room. My dining room. The long mahogany table, polished to a high sheen, was laden with food. A magnificent golden-brown roasted turkey sat on my silver platter, the one Arthur and I had received as a wedding gift. There were bowls of creamy mashed potatoes, steaming green bean casserole topped with crispy onions, jewel-toned cranberry sauce in my crystal serving dish, and 2 kinds of pie. My pies, my recipes. And around the table sat Liam and Chloe, surrounded by a dozen of their laughing, stylish friends. Chloe was at the head of the table, my seat, raising a glass of champagne, her face flushed with triumph. Liam was beside her, his arm draped around her possessively, a wide, empty smile on his face. They were in my house, eating from my dishes, sitting on my chairs, celebrating on top of the life I had built. My eyes scanned the image, drinking in every painful detail, the candlelight reflecting in the polished wood, the familiar pattern on the wallpaper, the corner of the portrait of Arthur, just visible over Liam's shoulder. It felt like a violation of the most intimate kind. They hadn't just taken my house. They had stolen my memories and were wearing them like a costume. Then I read the caption. Thankful for so much this year. A beautiful home, amazing friends, and my incredible wife at Chloe. The angel. We miss you, Mom. Hope you're enjoying the party at the home. We're raising a glass to you. Thankful, blessed, rash family. I stared at the words, at the lie so casually, so publicly told. Hope you're enjoying the party. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a performance for their followers, another post to burnish their image while they kicked me further into the abyss. There was no party. There was only the sound of a plastic fork scraping a paper plate in a silent room full of ghosts. I closed the tablet, the screen going dark, but the image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I could feel the cold of the room, the hard plastic of my chair, the hollow ache in my chest that was so much more than hunger. That night, sleep didn't come. I just lay there, listening to the silence, and understood that I was not just forgotten. I was being actively, deliberately erased. The weeks that followed Thanksgiving were a blur of gray days and long, dark nights. I withdrew even further, my silence becoming a shell. Chloe's Tuesday visits continued, but I was no longer a participant, merely a piece of scenery. I let her move me and pose me, my face a blank canvas she could no longer project her lies onto. My emptiness seemed to annoy her, but as long as I didn't actively resist, the show went on. I existed in a state of suspended animation, a profound and bottomless despair. I thought I had reached the floor of my personal hell. I was wrong. The floor was about to give way. The final cut, the one that severed the last thread of my passivity, came not with a bang, but with the quiet scroll of a thumb on a glass screen. It was a cold evening in early December. I was sitting in my room, wrapped in a thin, scratchy blanket, aimlessly scrolling through Chloe's Instagram feed. It was a form of self-flagellation, a way to remind myself of the depth of their betrayal. Post after post of their perfect life, a weekend getaway to a ski lodge, a charity gala, where Chloe wore a glittering gown, a picture of Aiden opening an early Christmas present. Then I saw it. It was a picture of Chloe's hand, perfectly manicured, holding a ridiculously expensive-looking cocktail at some chic downtown bar. Her fingers were adorned with several delicate, fashionable rings. But on her right ring finger, worn with an air of casual ownership, was a ring that did not belong to her. It was heavy, gold, with a flat onyx face bearing a simple, stylized A. It was Arthur's signet ring. The air left my lungs in a sudden, sharp gasp. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the last thing he had touched, the last gift he had given me. I could feel the memory rise up, so vivid it was like a physical presence in the room. Arthur, his body frail and failing in our bed, his hand, thin and cool, closing over mine. He had slipped the ring from his own finger and placed it on mine. His voice was a reedy whisper, a thread of sound in the quiet room. "This is for you, my Freya," he'd said, his eyes still so brilliant, holding mine. "Don't let them take it. This is the key. When the time comes, Remember, this is the key. I had never taken it off, not until the day they brought me here. In the confusion and shock, as they packed a small bag for me, Chloe had helped. She had cooed, "Oh, Freya, you don't want to wear that old thing to the resort. You might lose it. Let me keep it safe for you." Like a fool, lost in my grief and disorientation, I had let her slide it from my finger. "I'll put it right in your jewelry box in the safe," she had promised, her smile as bright and false as a stage light. And now, here it was. Not in a safe, not kept in my memory. It was being flaunted on her hand like a trophy, a conquest. Vintage, she'd probably tell her friends. A quaint little piece she'd picked up. Something inside me, something that had been dormant and frozen for months, finally snapped. The grief and despair that had paralyzed me curdled into a white-hot, diamond-hard rage. This was not just a theft of property. It was a desecration of a sacred moment. It was the theft of Arthur's last words, his final promise to me. My hands were shaking, but my movements were precise. I found the number for Liam's cell on the tablet and pressed call. It rang twice before Chloe answered, her voice syrupy and annoyed. "Hello?" "Chloe," I said. My own voice sounded strange, a rusty hinge forced open after years of disuse. "Freya? What is it? Is something wrong? It's late." "The ring," I said, the words stark and cold. "Arthur's ring. You're wearing it." There was a pause. Then, a sound that broke me more than any lie she had ever told. She laughed. It wasn't a nervous titter. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh, dripping with amusement and contempt. "Oh, this old thing?" she said, her voice a caricature of casualness. "I found it rattling around in a drawer. It's vintage, you know. Actually kind of chic. What are you going to do with it, Freya? Wear it to bingo night? You should really lighten up. It's just a thing. It's just a thing." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. She had reduced the symbol of my 40-year marriage, the key to my husband's final legacy, to a mere thing, an accessory for her night out. In that moment, I saw her with perfect, terrifying clarity. I saw the bottomless pit of her narcissism, the casual, unthinking cruelty that was the very core of her being. "He gave that to me," I whispered, my voice shaking with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "He told me it was the key." Her laugh came again, shorter this time, impatient. "A key to what, Freya?" "The shuffleboard court. Honestly, you're being dramatic. Look, I have to go. People are waiting. We'll talk about this on Tuesday." The click of the phone ending the call was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was not the sound of a conversation ending. It was the sound of a gavel falling. It was the sound of a line being crossed, a point of no return. It was the sound of a declaration of war. I sat there in the encroaching darkness of my room, the tablet screen glowing on my lap. The rage didn't dissipate. It solidified, cooled, and hardened into something else. Purpose. The fog of despair had finally lifted, burned away by the heat of her contempt. They thought I was a feeble old woman, a ghost in their machine, a character in their social media play. They thought they had taken everything. They were wrong. They had left me with one thing: Arthur's last words. "This is the key." And as I sat there in the sterile silence of golden years, I finally understood what he meant. The ring wasn't the key. The memory was. The betrayal was. They thought they were burying me. They had no idea they were planting a seed. The hollow where Arthur's ring used to be on my finger had become a cold, phantom limb. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a promise, a history, the last tangible piece of him. And Chloe had flaunted it on a screen for the world to see, a trophy from a battle I hadn't even known I was fighting. The phone call, her dismissive, mocking laughter, had not broken me. It had done something far more dangerous. It had cauterized the wound. The bleeding had stopped, and in its place, a scar of cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. They thought I was a ghost haunting the halls of my old life. They were wrong. A ghost is a memory, an echo. I was becoming something else entirely, a presence they couldn't see, gathering strength in the shadows they had cast me into. The humiliation of that L-shaped room, the cloying smell of antiseptic and overboiled cabbage, the condescending pats on my hand from staff who saw me as a collection of symptoms. It all began to feel less like a prison and more like a cocoon, and in that quiet, simmering darkness, Arthur's voice returned to me. Not as a memory of grief, but as a clear, strategic whisper from a lifetime ago. From a night when we sat by the fire, a storm rattling the windows of our home. He had just sold his first major patent, and the money was terrifying, a weight we didn't know how to carry. He had looked at me, his eyes reflecting the flames, and said, "They'll come for it one day, Freya. Not the robbers in the night, but the ones with smiling faces. The ones who call you family." I had laughed it off then, but he had been serious. He had taken my hand. "When they forget you," he'd said, his voice low and urgent. "When they count you out and erase your name from the story you helped write, you remember Project Nightingale? The ring is the key. The ring. The key. Not a physical key to a lockbox, but something else. A key to a memory. A key to a path." Chloe hadn't just stolen a ring. She had unwittingly handed me the first piece of the puzzle, Project Nightingale. The name was absurd, something out of a spy novel, but that was Arthur. He hid his most brilliant creations behind innocuous, almost whimsical names. I had to get to a computer. Not the monitored tablet they let me use for 20 minutes a day to play solitaire, but a real one. The nursing home's computer lab was a sad, forgotten room at the end of a long hallway, smelling of dust and decaying plastic. It housed 3 beige desktop towers from a forgotten era of technology, their fans humming a weary, mournful tune. It was meant for residents to send stilted emails to their grandchildren, but it was almost always empty. Getting there was the first test. I waited until after the 9 p.m. medication rounds, when the night staff was thinned out and settled in for a long, quiet shift at the central station, their attention focused on flickering security monitors and lukewarm coffee. I feigned sleepiness, allowed the orderly to tuck me in, her movements perfunctory and impatient. I lay still in the dark, listening to the rhythm of the building, the distant cough, the groan of the pipes, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the corridor. I counted to 500, then 1,000. The silence deepened. Slipping out of bed, my joints protesting, I moved with a slowness that I hoped would be mistaken for the shuffling of a disoriented old woman if anyone saw me on the cameras. I kept to the edges of the hallway, a ghost in a threadbare nightgown, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Each flicker of a fluorescent light felt like a spotlight. The computer lab door was unlocked. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the silence. The room was illuminated only by the faint glow of the exit sign in the hall. I sat down at the terminal furthest from the door, the one half hidden by a filing cabinet. The computer whirred to life with a groan, the screen casting a pale, accusatory light on my face. My hands trembled as I moved the mouse. The connection was slow, agonizingly so. Every passing second felt like an eternity in which I could be discovered. I navigated to a secure browser Arthur had insisted I install on my personal laptop years ago, a relic I hadn't thought about since his death. I typed in the address for the web portal he had shown me only once, a string of characters that looked like gibberish. The page loaded. It was stark white, completely blank, except for a single, pulsing cursor in a black box. Beneath it, 2 words, Project Nightingale. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. I typed the words in, my fingers stiff with cold and fear. The page refreshed. Another box appeared, asking for a password. The ring is the key. But what was the lock? It wasn't a word. Arthur never used simple words. He used moments. He used our life. My mind raced through our shared history, anniversaries, birthdays, the names of our favorite paintings. Nothing felt right. It had to be something meaningful, something foundational. "When they forget you," he'd said. "When they erase your name." And then it hit me. A memory so sharp it felt like a physical blow. A rainy Tuesday in October, decades ago. I was standing in the office of my boss at the City Art Gallery, my letter of resignation on his desk. I was at the peak of my career as a curator, respected and sought after. But Arthur had an idea, a vision for a software company that everyone else called a fantasy. He needed me, not just as a wife, but as a partner, a strategist, the one who saw the patterns he missed, the one who managed the world so he could be free to create it. Walking away from the gallery felt like cutting off a limb, but staying felt like betraying the future. I chose him. I chose us. That date. The day I ceased to be Freya the curator and became the silent partner in Arthur's empire. The day I was first forgotten by the world so that he could be remembered. With shaking fingers, I typed in the date. Month, day, year, 10/23, 1985. I hit enter. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen remained frozen. A wave of despair washed over me. I was wrong. It was all a fantasy, the ramblings of a grieving, desperate old woman. But then, with a soft electronic chime, the system unlocked. The screen filled with text and diagrams, a flowchart of corporate entities that made my head spin. It was a labyrinth, a maze of holding companies, shell corporations, and offshore accounts, all spiraling out from a single central point. And at that center, in bold, stark letters, was the name. Project Nightingale, LLC. It was the parent company, the silent, invisible owner of everything. My eyes scanned the web of connections, my old curator's mind instinctively looking for patterns, for the narrative thread in the chaos. I traced the lines downwards, through layers of financial entities with names like Ethelred Capital and the Albion Trust. My finger followed one particularly thick line, and my blood ran cold. It led to a name I recognized. Serenity Senior Living, Inc., the parent company of a national chain of assisted living facilities, the parent company of Golden Years Residential Care Home. This place, this hellhole. It wasn't just a random budget nursing home Liam and Chloe had dumped me in. It was a subsidiary, an asset, a tiny, insignificant cog in a multi-billion-dollar machine that Arthur, that we owned. They had imprisoned me in a cage of my own making. The irony was so profound, so grotesquely perfect, that a dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. I needed help. This was a world of corporate law and high-stakes finance I didn't understand. I scrolled through the internal documents, searching for a name, a contact, an ally in this digital fortress. I found a directory for the board of trustees for Project Nightingale. Most were legal firms, investment banks. But one name stood out. David Chen, Arthur's personal attorney for over 30 years. David was more than a lawyer. He was a friend, a man of fierce, unwavering loyalty who had wept openly at Arthur's funeral. If anyone was still on our side, it was him. But I couldn't call him from here. Every call was logged. I needed a ghost phone, a burner. My weekly allowance, the pittance Liam and Chloe wired to a prepaid card for sundries, was a joke, but I had been saving it, every dollar. I knew a young orderly on the night shift, a kid named Leo with a gambling habit and eyes that were always tired. He was careless, but he was also predictable. For $50, he'd look the other way. For $100, he'd run an errand. The next night, I caught him on his break, smoking by the service entrance. I pressed 2 crumpled $50 bills into his hand. "I need a phone," I whispered, my voice urgent. "A prepaid one, and I need you to forget you ever saw me." He looked from the money to my face, a flicker of something, pity maybe, or just avarice, in his eyes. He nodded once, pocketed the cash, and disappeared into the night. An hour later, a small cardboard box was sitting on the floor just inside my room, pushed silently under the door. Inside was a cheap plastic burner phone, still in its wrapper. I waited again for the deepest point of the night, my new treasure hidden under my mattress, and retreated to the only place with any semblance of privacy, the cold, tiled floor of the bathroom. I huddled against the door, the cheap plastic of the phone feeling like a lifeline in my hand. I punched in David's number, a number I knew by heart. It rang 3 times, and then his voice, thick with sleep, answered. "Chen." "David," I whispered, my voice cracking. "It's Freya. It's Freya Albright." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, then silence. For a terrifying second, I thought he'd hung up. "Freya? My God! Where are you? Are you all right? We've been trying to reach you for months. Liam said you were unwell, that you didn't want to speak to anyone. David, they've lied about everything, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. They put me in a home. They're trying to sell the house. Chloe is wearing my ring. Slow down, Freya. Slow down, he said, his voice now wide awake, sharp and focused. I believe you, but you need to understand the situation you're in. It's bad. He paused, and I could hear the faint sound of keyboard clicks as he pulled up my file. Liam and Chloe filed for a full legal conservatorship 3 months ago. They have documents, Freya. Detailed medical evaluations, signed by a Dr. Alistair Finch, stating you have severe dementia and are incapable of managing your own affairs. They have a durable power of attorney that you supposedly signed over to them, giving them complete control of the Albright Trust. The tile floor felt like a block of ice beneath me. But that's impossible. I've never met a Dr. Finch. I never signed anything. I know. David's voice was grim. They are forgeries. I'm certain of it. But they are expertly done. They're notarized. They've been filed with the court and accepted. As of right now, Freya, they are legally binding. Until we can get you in front of a judge and prove otherwise, they are your legal guardians. They have built a perfect legal cage around you. The words hung in the air, each one a bar in that cage. It wasn't just malice. It was meticulous, calculated fraud. They hadn't just discarded me, they had legally erased me. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We fight, he said, a spark of the old fire in his tone. But we have to be smart. They have isolated you completely. The first thing they did was consolidate all your assets into the trust, which they now control. Your bank accounts, your credit cards, your personal email. They've locked you out of everything. You are, in a digital sense, a non-person. They've created a digital prison to complement the physical one. His words confirmed the dead ends I'd already hit. The password incorrect notifications on my email, the account frozen message on my banking portal. I was a ghost in the machine, my own data now a weapon turned against me. The walls weren't just the cheap plasterboard of golden years. They were firewalls, encrypted and absolute. My prison was real, but it was also made of ones and zeros, an invisible fortress guarded by my own son. The daily reality of it was a slow, grinding torture. The director, a man named Mr. Harris with a plastic smile and predatory eyes, became my personal warden. He would visit me under the guise of concern, his tone dripping with condescending pity. It's for your own protection, Freya, he'd say, his voice like oil on water, as he confiscated a newspaper I was reading. We don't want to get you agitated with all that nasty news, do we? Agitated. The word he used for a cogent thought, for any sign that the woman they'd labeled as demented was still present. The staff, their wages supplemented by Chloe's generous donations, followed his lead. They treated me like a difficult child. They intercepted my mail. They monitored my tablet use. They reported every conversation. Every friendly face was a potential informant. Every kind word could be a lie. My world had shrunk to the size of my room, and my interactions were limited to people paid to manage my decline. The loneliness was a physical weight, a pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. They had done their work well. I was isolated, legally powerless, and financially destitute. Hope was a dangerous currency I couldn't afford to spend. But even in the deepest despair, the human heart searches for an ally. I found mine, or so I thought, in a young nurse named Maria. She was different from the others. She was new, her eyes not yet glazed over with the cynical weariness of her colleagues. She had a gentle touch and a quiet smile that seemed genuine. She would linger after bringing my medication, asking about the book I was reading or the picture of Arthur on my nightstand. She listened. That was the most seductive thing of all. She actually listened. After weeks of careful observation, of testing her with small, innocent questions and watching her reactions, I made a decision. I took a risk. One afternoon, as she was changing the water in the vase of wilting carnations Chloe had left behind on her last TikTok visit, I broke my silence. Maria, I began, my voice low. Can I tell you something? Can I trust you? She turned, her large, dark eyes wide with sympathy. She pulled the visitor's chair closer to my bed and sat down, taking my hand in hers. "Of course, Freya. You can tell me anything." And so I did. The words poured out of me, a torrent of truth I had held back for months. I told her I wasn't sick. I told her my son and his wife had stolen everything, that they had forged documents and locked me away to plunder my husband's legacy. I told her about the house, the money, the life that had been ripped away from me. I showed her the fire in my eyes, tried to make her see the woman I was, not the frail patient they wanted her to see. She listened intently, nodding, her expression a perfect mask of compassion and outrage on my behalf. "That's horrible," she whispered when I was done squeezing my hand. "It's criminal. You have to fight them." "I am," I said, a wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. "But I'm alone." "No," she said, her gaze steady and reassuring. "You're not alone anymore." She promised she would help, that she would be my eyes and ears, that she would find a way to get messages to David without them being traced. For the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of genuine hope. I had an ally. The cage had a crack in it. I slept soundly that night, the first restful sleep I'd had since arriving at Golden Years. The next morning, Mr. Harris paid me a visit. He didn't knock. He strode into my room, his usual plastic smile replaced with a tight, unpleasant line. He stood over my bed, his presence filling the small space. "Freya," he said, and the condescension in his tone was sharper now, honed to a weapon's edge. "I understand you've been having some delusions, telling stories." My blood went cold. My eyes darted past him to the hallway, and I saw her, Maria. She was at the nurse's station, busy with a chart, her back to my room. But I could see her reflection in the glass of the medication cart. She was perfectly still, pointedly, deliberately, not looking in my direction. She was avoiding my gaze, and in that moment, I knew. The sympathetic eyes, the gentle hand, the promises, all of it, a performance, a lie I had been desperate enough to buy. "We're very concerned about this narrative you're creating," Mr. Harris continued, his voice a low threat. "Your son is a very generous man, a great benefactor to this facility. Let's not upset him, shall we? It would be a shame to have to increase your medication or restrict your privileges further, for your own good, of course." He gave me one last, thin smile and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. I stared at the empty doorway, the relief I had felt the day before curdling into something toxic and black. The crack in the cage hadn't been a way out. It had been a listening device. The last ember of hope was extinguished, drenched in the cold water of betrayal. David's words came back to me. "They have isolated you completely." I hadn't understood the true depth of that statement until now. I wasn't just alone. I was utterly, completely, and hopelessly alone, surrounded by enemies disguised as friends. There was no one coming to save me. There was no one I could trust. There was only me. And in that absolute crushing solitude, the last of my fear burned away, leaving behind nothing but the cold, clear certainty of what I had to do next. If I was going to get out, I would have to become a better ghost than they could ever imagine. After Maria's face, a mask of feigned concern had faded from my doorway. A silence descended that was deeper than any I had ever known. It was the silence of absolute solitude, the chilling quiet of a tomb. They had sealed every exit. Liam and Chloe had my money. The institution had my body. And now, Maria had my last flicker of trust. Every potential ally was a potential Judas. Every helping hand was a potential shackle. In that moment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling tiles, I understood. To fight them on their terms, to shout, to plead, to reason, was to play a game I was designed to lose. They had written the rules, and the first rule was that I was crazy. Any protest I made would simply be evidence of my agitation, further proof of the dementia they had invented for me. So I would not play their game. I would play my own. Defeat became my mask. A profound and total surrender was the only weapon they would never see coming. The next morning, when a different nurse, a stern woman named Doris, came in with my morning pills, I didn't meet her eyes with defiance. I gave her a watery, unfocused smile. I fumbled with the small paper cup, my hand trembling, a tremor I summoned from the memory of genuine fear, now repurposed as a tool. "Oh dear," I mumbled, my voice a breathy, fragile thing. "I'm all thumbs today." Doris sighed, her impatience a palpable force, but she helped me, her touch rough and hurried. It was a start. The true test came a week later, with Chloe's ritualistic visit. I heard the click-clack of her heels on the linoleum long before she appeared, a harbinger of the saccharine performance to come. She burst into the room, phone already in hand, a radiant smile plastered on her face for an audience of strangers. "Freya, darling, look what I brought you," she chirped, brandishing a pastry box from a bakery I knew she despised. In the past, my silence would have been a stony rebellion. Today, it was a vacant landscape. I let my eyes drift towards her, taking a moment to focus, as if pulling my mind back from some distant, foggy place. "Chloe?" I whispered, letting a hint of confusion color my tone. "Is that you, dear? You look so bright." Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of annoyance at my failure to play my part with sufficient enthusiasm. But then she recovered, leaning in to kiss the air beside my cheek. "Of course, it's me, here for my favorite mother-in-law." She set up her phone on the small bedside table, propping it against my water pitcher. The red recording light blinked on. The show had begun. "I was just telling everyone online how much you love the fresh air here," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sweetness. "It's doing you a world of good, isn't it? So much better than being all alone in that big, drafty house." Instead of flinching, I leaned into the lie. I reached out a shaky hand and patted her arm. The house, yes. So big. I let my gaze drift towards the window, at the manicured, sterile lawn. Arthur. He loved the gardens there. I let a single, genuine tear trace a path down my cheek. A tear for my husband, but one she would interpret as the maudlin sentimentality of a failing mind. It worked better than I could have imagined. Her eyes lit up. This was perfect content. The tragic, fading matriarch, lovingly cared for by her saintly daughter-in-law. She patted my hand back, her touch lingering just long enough for the camera. "I know, sweetie. We're taking good care of it for you. For when you're better." The crown jewel of her performance was Arthur's ring. It glittered on her finger under the harsh fluorescent lights, a beacon of her betrayal. My stomach churned with a cold, hard fury. The key, my key, on her hand. I looked at it, and for the first time, I didn't look away in pain. I looked at it with the detached curiosity of a confused old woman. I reached for her hand, my touch feather-light and quavering. "What a pretty bauble," I murmured, stroking the facet of the diamond. My own engagement ring felt cold on my finger. "So sparkly," Chloe preened. "Arthur gave this to you, remember? You gave it to me, for safekeeping." I looked up at her, my eyes wide and guileless. "Did I? How kind of me. It looks so lovely on you, dear, much better on a young hand." I let my own hand, wrinkled and spotted, fall back onto the thin blanket. "My hands are so old now." I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes. She had won so completely, so utterly, that the vanquished was now complimenting her on the spoils of war. After she finished her recording, packed up her pastry, and left me with a brisk, "Be good now." The vacant smile fell from my face. I turned my head to the window and watched her get into her car, my car, and drive away. Their arrogance was more than my camouflage. It was my fortress. They didn't just think I was losing my mind. They were certain of it. They were celebrating it. And in their celebration, they had stopped watching me. They were only watching their own reflection in the mirror of their success. This new role granted me a strange kind of freedom. The staff, convinced I was a harmless, senile resident, began to ignore me. My slow, shuffling walks down the hall were no longer monitored with suspicion, but with a kind of weary pity. I was invisible. And in my invisibility, I found my way to the one place in Golden Years that nobody cared about, the resident computer lab. It was a sad, forgotten room, tucked away at the end of a long corridor. It smelled of dust and overheated plastic. 3 beige desktop computers from another era sat on mismatched desks. The internet connection was painfully slow, the keyboards were sticky, and the hum of the cooling fans was a constant, mournful drone. It was perfect. To the staff, my new hobby of sitting in the lab for hours, staring blankly at the screen, was just another symptom of my decline. "She just sits there," I heard Doris telling another nurse. "Sometimes she types a little, probably thinks it's a typewriter. A bit sad, really." Let them think I was sad. Let them think I was typing letters to ghosts. While they saw a doddering old woman, I was waging a war. I created a new, anonymous email address. My first message was to David Chen. It was short, a single line. A test. Subject: inquiry. Message: are the winters still cold in Prague? It was a code from decades ago. A question Arthur and I used with David to confirm a secure channel when dealing with a particularly ruthless corporate takeover. The answer had to be precise. I waited for 2 days, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I sat in the computer lab, clicking aimlessly through nursing home activity pages, pretending to read articles about the benefits of chair yoga. Then it arrived. Subject: inquiry. Message: colder than a banker's heart. The nightingales, however, still sing. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. He remembered. He was ready. The nightingales, however, still sing. Arthur's project. Our secret. David was still loyal. From that moment on, the computer lab became my war room. The Golden Years Online Book Club was born. It was an entirely fictional entity, a cover for my communications. Our correspondence was a masterpiece of misdirection. My instructions were not hidden in complex ciphers, but in plain sight, woven into the fabric of literary analysis. My first real directive was cloaked in a discussion of Dickens's Bleak House. To dchensq@privatemail.net. From lonelyreader7@webmail.com. Subject: Book Club Bleak House, Chain 15. David. I've been rereading Bleak House. It's remarkable how the central lawsuit, Jarndyce and Jarndyce, consumes everything around it, ensnaring generations in its procedural molasses. It reminds me of the utter necessity of a clear and unimpeachable claim from the outset. I draw your attention to the establishment of the initial trust documents, the ones concerning the family assets. I suspect the signatures may have been, let's call it, artistically rendered, much like the novel's foggy depiction of London. I believe a forensic analysis, particularly of documents dated within the last fiscal year, would be as illuminating as a sudden burst of sunlight on Chancery. We must establish the foundation of their claim is fraudulent before we address the superstructure built upon it. Let's focus our reading there first. The rest of the plot can wait. Yours in literature, F. David understood immediately. His reply came disguised as a critique of my interpretation. 2. lonelyreader7@webmail.com. From dchen.esq@privatemail.net. Subject: Book Club, Bleak House. Each, 1 to 5. F. An astute observation. The foundation is everything. I have engaged a rare book specialist, a forensic document analyst, to examine the first editions you mentioned. He is quite renowned for spotting forgeries. While he conducts his analysis, perhaps we should turn our attention to the financial accounts of the Jarndyce estate itself. Do you recall any specific ledgers or chapters that might seem out of place to a careful reader? Any unusual expenditures or transfers? Your unique perspective as the original librarian of this collection would be invaluable. Regards, David. He attached a file, password protected. The password was the name of the small, obscure Parisian gallery where I had first met Arthur. Inside was not a chapter of a book, but the complete labyrinthine financial statements of Ethelred Capital for the past 3 years. Liam, in his arrogance, had assumed no one was looking. He had assumed the true owner was incapacitated. He was wrong. I spent the next 3 weeks in that dusty, forgotten room, my mind, the one they claimed was gone, sharper and more focused than it had been in years. I cross-referenced expenditures, flagged suspicious transfers, and identified shell corporations Liam had set up to siphon funds. I found payments to the director of Golden Years. I found exorbitant consulting fees paid to Chloe's defunct lifestyle blog. I found the purchase of Arthur's ring, not from a personal account, but classified as a corporate morale asset. The sheer, brazen scale of their theft was breathtaking. They weren't just living off the interest, they were gutting the company from the inside out. My hands would shake, but not from age. They shook with a cold, controlled rage. I would type for hours, my fingers flying across the sticky keys. My emails to David became more direct, the literary camouflage thinner. We moved from Dickens to Sun Tzu. Subject: the art of war. David, Sun Tzu says, all warfare is based on deception. Our enemy is overconfident and believes the battlefield is secure. They have exposed their supply lines. I have attached a document marking their vulnerabilities. These are not skirmishes, they are kill shots. We must move to consolidate our own forces. The majority shareholder, Nightingale, has been silent long enough. It is time for her voice to be heard. I dictated the strategy. I identified which board members were loyal to Arthur's original vision and which were Liam's sycophants. I laid out the precise legal sequence. First, invalidate the conservatorship using the proof of signature forgery. Second, use my restored authority as the sole director of Project Nightingale to vote its majority shares in Ethelred Capital. Third, call an emergency meeting to remove the compromised board and assume direct control. My mind was my only weapon, and it was now fully armed. During this time, my performance as the senile fox reached its zenith. I was a ghost in their machine, a harmless specter drifting through the halls. I would sit in the common room, a half-finished knitting project in my lap, the yarn a hideous, garish yellow Chloe had brought me, and I would listen. I listened to the nurses complain about budget cuts. I listened to the residents whisper about the declining quality of the food. I listened to the director taking calls, where his voice would drop to a conspiratorial hush. I was gathering intelligence on the ground while my general, David, prepared the aerial assault. Chloe's visits became a source of grim satisfaction. I would compliment the ring, her hair, her ghastly outfits, all while knowing that with every email I sent, the ground beneath her feet was turning to quicksand. She and Liam had built their palace on my foundation, never thinking to check if the owner was still home. The day came. David's email was brief, the subject line containing only a single word: tonight. I knew what it meant. I spent the afternoon in the common room, in my usual chair. The television was blaring some inane game show. Other residents were dozing or staring into space. I sat with my knitting, the yellow yarn pooling around my feet. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. On the surface, I was just another old woman waiting for dinner. But inside, a storm was breaking. In a glass-walled boardroom high above the city, David Chen's face appeared on a massive screen. The emergency virtual board meeting for Ethelred Capital had begun. The room was filled with men in expensive suits, their faces a mixture of annoyance and confusion. These were Liam's men, handpicked for their loyalty and lack of curiosity. Mr. Chen, the chairman, a portly man named Barrows, said with undisguised irritation, "This is highly irregular. On what grounds have you called this meeting?" David's face was calm, his expression unreadable. He was in his element. "I have called it on the authority granted to me by the majority shareholder of this corporation," he stated, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. A nervous chuckle went through the board. Liam, patched in from the study in my house, smirked. "David, what is this?" "My mother is the majority shareholder, and as her legal guardian, I can assure you she hasn't authorized anything. We all know her condition. This is sad, frankly." David didn't even glance at Liam's image on the screen. He addressed the board as a whole. There seems to be a misunderstanding. The conservatorship papers you filed, Mr. Holloway, have been found by a court to be based on forged medical evaluations and fraudulent signatures. As of 1 hour ago, they were invalidated. Your legal authority over Freya Holloway and her assets is null and void. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Barrows's face went pale. Liam's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of disbelief. That's impossible. That's a lie. I have the court order right here, David said, holding up a document to his camera. But that is a secondary issue. The primary issue is the identity of the majority shareholder. You see, Freya Holloway is not, and has never been, the majority shareholder of Ethelred Capital. She is merely its lifelong, salaried chairman emeritus. He let that statement hang in the air. The confusion in the room curdled into panic. What the hell are you talking about, Chen? Barrows stammered. Who owns the shares? David leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold. Ethelred Capital is a wholly owned subsidiary. The parent company, the entity that holds a 90% controlling stake, is a private holding firm established by Arthur Holloway 30 years ago. A firm whose sole director, appointed by Arthur himself with rights of succession, is his wife, Freya. He paused, letting the weight of his next words crush them. I am here tonight, representing the vote of that silent majority shareholder. I am here representing Project Nightingale. The name meant nothing to them. It was a ghost, a phantom. They frantically searched their memories, their documents, but it was a name buried so deep in the corporate architecture they had never bothered to look. They had been rearranging the furniture in a house they didn't own. They had been siphoning money from an account whose true signatory was watching them from a nursing home computer lab. They had operated for years under the delusion that their power was absolute, that the source of their wealth was a helpless old woman they had successfully caged. They had no idea who they were truly working for. In the common room of the Golden Years home, I slowly, deliberately dropped a stitch in my knitting. A small, perfect, unnoticeable flaw in the pattern. The first of many things to come undone. The light from the computer screen was the only star in my small, dark room. It cast long shadows that danced on the cinderblock walls, a silent audience to the theater of the absurd playing out on my monitor. It was Liam and Chloe's Instagram Live, broadcast from the heart of my home. They called it an open house. I called it a desecration. Chloe, holding a champagne flute, pivoted her phone in a wide arc. The grand living room, my living room, was filled with strangers in expensive shoes, sipping wine and nibbling on canapes served by a catering staff. My Persian rugs, which had cushioned Arthur's and my steps for 40 years, were being trod upon by people evaluating the floorboards beneath them. "Hello, everyone! Chloe and Liam here," she chirped, her voice a saccharine poison. She pulled Liam into the frame. He looked flushed, his tie loosened, a sheen of sweat on his brow from either the alcohol or the thrill of avarice. "We are just so overwhelmed by the turnout. It seems everyone wants a piece of this gorgeous history, my history." She said it as if it were a commodity, like the marble countertops she was leaning against. Liam draped an arm around her, playing the part of the magnanimous host. "It's bittersweet, of course," he said, his voice thick with false sentiment. "So many memories here. But it's time for a new chapter, for us, and for this incredible estate." I watched, my hands resting on the cool plastic of the keyboard. There was no anger left. Anger was a hot, messy emotion, and what I felt now was cold, pure, and patient. It was the calm of a glacier, moving with imperceptible slowness, but with the power to grind mountains into dust. While they performed for their online audience, David's updates had been arriving in my inbox, disguised as our usual book club correspondence. An email from an hour ago. Regarding our discussion on Great Expectations, all financial ledgers have been fully audited and compiled. The protagonist's claim is irrefutable. Another, 30 minutes later. Further analysis of The Count of Monte Cristo confirms the final transfer of assets is complete. The island is secured. Chloe was showing off the library, Arthur's sanctuary. "We're thinking of knocking down this wall," she said to the camera, gesturing vaguely. "Open up the space." All these old books are so dusty, aren't they? We'd want something much more modern, more minimalist. A potential buyer, a man with a slicked-back ponytail, asked, "What about the previous owner? Is she around?" Liam stepped in smoothly. "My mother," he said, the words dripping with practiced pity. "She's in a wonderful facility getting the best care. Her mind, well, it's not what it used to be. It was all becoming too much for her. We felt this was the most compassionate thing to do." Compassion. The word was a perversion in his mouth. They were selling my life out from under me and calling it kindness. They were dismantling Arthur's legacy and calling it progress. I leaned closer to the screen. I wanted to burn their faces into my memory, the smug tilt of Liam's chin, the predatory glint in Chloe's eye. "A toast!" Chloe announced, raising her glass. Liam refilled it from a bottle of champagne I recognized, a vintage Arthur had been saving for our 50th anniversary. "To saying goodbye to the old and hello to the new." The strangers in my house echoed the toast. The sound was tinny through the laptop's cheap speakers. As they drank, I minimized the window. A new email from David was waiting. The subject line was a single word, our prearranged signal. Checkmate. I closed the laptop. The room plunged back into darkness. The party was over. They just didn't know it yet. Miles away, in the hushed, antiseptic office of the Golden Years luxury senior living facility, Director Harris was tidying his desk for the evening. He hummed a tuneless melody, pleased with himself. Chloe had slipped him another cash-filled envelope that afternoon, a bonus for his continued vigilance over me. He'd made sure my computer access was limited to a few approved sites, that my calls were monitored, and that Maria, the nurse I had foolishly trusted, reported my every sigh and whisper. He was contemplating a weekend trip to the coast when a chime from his computer broke the silence. An email. He glanced at the sender. Legal Department, Ethelred Capital. He sat up a little straighter. The subject line made his blood run cold. Urgent confidential. Notice of acquisition. Immediate management restructuring. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked it open. It wasn't an email. It was a wall of dense, impenetrable legalese. He scanned the text, his eyes darting, searching for meaning in the corporate jargon. Words leaped out at him. Pursuant to Clause 11.4 of the holding agreement, Project Nightingale, exercising its majority shareholder rights, has executed a full and total buyout of the subsidiary entity known as Serenity Senior Living, LLC. Serenity Senior Living. That was them. That was the entire chain of nursing homes. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. He read on, his breath catching in his throat. Effective, 1800 EST, all existing management contracts at the facility and regional level are hereby terminated. Your employment and that of your entire administrative staff is concluded. A transition team, acting on behalf of the new ownership, will arrive on site tomorrow morning at 0900 Quag to assume control of operations. You are instructed to cooperate fully and to refrain from accessing, altering, or deleting any financial or resident files. Non-compliance will be met with immediate legal action. He reread it, then a third time. It made no sense. A hostile takeover. There had been no rumors, no warnings. He fumbled for his phone, his thumbs slick with sweat as he tried to call his regional manager. The line was dead. He tried the corporate headquarters. A recorded message. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please refer to all future correspondence from Ethelred Capital. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He thought of Chloe's envelope, the cash now sitting in his briefcase. It felt less like a bonus and more like evidence. He tried to call her, his last resort. The call went to voicemail. Of course, she was at her party, toasting her new life, completely oblivious that the foundation of their entire scheme had just been liquefied. Mr. Harris stared at the computer screen, at the formal, impersonal notice of his professional execution. He was a king who had woken up to find his castle had been sold overnight, and he was now just a trespasser in the ruins. The next morning arrived with a cool, pristine light that promised nothing of the storm to come. While Liam and Chloe were likely nursing champagne headaches back at my mansion, I was preparing for my resurrection. David had arranged for a package to be delivered to me at dawn, smuggled in by a security guard who was now on our payroll. Inside was not the shapeless beige gown of a golden years resident, but an Armani power suit, charcoal gray, with the sharp, clean lines of a razor. The fabric felt alien against my skin after so long in soft, worn-out cotton. It felt like armor. As I dressed, I looked at my reflection in the small, distorted mirror of my room. The woman looking back was not the frail, confused widow they had created. The lines on my face were still there, but they no longer looked like maps of sorrow. They were etchings of resilience. My eyes, which they had described as vacant, were now clear and focused, holding the cold fire of a reckoning. At precisely 8:45 a.m., a sleek black sedan, silent as a shark, rolled to a stop on the service road behind my building. David was waiting for me. He held the door open, his expression calm and steady, the eye of the hurricane we were about to unleash. I got in, the leather seats cool and firm. Behind us, a second car carried the auditors, a team of stone-faced men and women who specialized in dismantling financial empires built on lies. As we drove towards the main entrance, David gave me a final, reassuring nod. "Ready, Freya?" "I've been ready for a long time, David," I replied, my voice steady. We pulled up to the grand entrance of Golden Years just before 9. Through the tinted window, I could see Liam and Chloe in the lobby. They had their phone propped up on a reception desk, filming another one of their little morality plays. Chloe was dabbing a napkin on the corner of an elderly resident's mouth, a woman I knew they'd never spoken a word to before. "It's just so important to make sure our loved ones are comfortable and cared for, isn't it?" Chloe said to her invisible audience. "We feel so blessed to have found a place like Golden Years." Liam, looking smug, saw our sedan. He probably assumed it was a potential new client, drawn in by their fraudulent fame. He strode toward the glass doors, ready to greet the newcomer with his false charm. David exited the car first. The auditors fanned out behind him, their briefcases held like weapons. Liam's smile faltered, his eyes narrowed. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the unnervingly quiet lobby. "This is a private facility. You can't just—" His words died in his throat. David didn't answer. He simply moved to the rear door of the car and opened it for me. I stepped out. I let the moment hang in the air, thick and heavy. I saw the sequence of emotions flash across their faces, a rapid, silent film of their world ending. First, confusion. Who was this woman? Then, a flicker of recognition, immediately dismissed as impossible. It couldn't be. The woman they knew wore stained cardigans and shuffled her feet. This woman stood tall, her suit a declaration, her gaze a weapon. Finally, as the truth crashed down upon them, came the dawning, sickening horror. Chloe's phone clattered to the marble floor. Her perfectly made-up face went slack, the mask dissolving to reveal the raw panic beneath. Liam stared, his mouth slightly agape, the color draining from his face until he was the color of ash. I met their stunned, horrified gazes. I walked slowly towards them, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the polished floor. "Good morning," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence, as cold and clear as a winter morning. "I'm your new landlord, and you're trespassing." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a universe being rewritten. Liam and Chloe stood frozen, two statues of disbelief. The few staff members in the lobby looked back and forth between us, their faces a mask of confusion. I walked past my son and his wife without another glance, as if they were nothing more than furniture. I surveyed the lobby, my lobby. The bland corporate art on the walls would have to go. The lighting was too sterile. I was already redecorating. Then I turned back to them. I wanted to see their faces as I dismantled their reality, brick by brick. "The house," I began, my tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "The one you hosted a party in last night. You can't sell it. It's never been yours to sell." Liam finally found his voice, a choked, incredulous whisper. "What are you talking about?" "It's in the trust. Our lawyer—" "Your lawyer was misinformed," I said, cutting him off. "Because you fed him fraudulent documents. The mansion, you see, isn't personal property. It was transferred into a corporate holding company 30 years ago, a company called Project Nightingale. It's a corporate asset. Chloe's eyes widened. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to process the information, trying to find an escape route that didn't exist. I continued, savoring the draining color from their faces. And the trust fund? The one you've been so generously living off of. The one you used to pay your bills, your car leases, your vacations? The cash you used to bribe the staff here? I gestured vaguely at the terrified director, Mr. Harris, who was trying to shrink into the wallpaper. That wasn't an inheritance, Liam. That was the company's primary operating account. I let that sink in. The air crackled with the unspoken truth. For the last 2 years, I said, delivering the final killing blow, you haven't been living off family money. You've been systematically committing felony wire fraud and embezzlement. Not from a helpless old woman, but from a multi-billion-dollar international corporation. I paused, letting my eyes lock onto theirs. My corporation. It was Chloe who broke first. A choked sob escaped her lips. The carefully constructed image of the TikTok saint shattered, leaving only a common, terrified thief. Liam just stood there, swaying slightly, his face a canvas of ruin. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. He wasn't seeing a mother he had betrayed, but a power he had fatally underestimated. At a subtle nod from David, 2 of the security guards, men who, only yesterday, had been taking Chloe's money to spy on me, stepped forward. Their faces were impassive, their allegiance now clear. They worked for me. What are you doing? Liam stammered, as one of the guards gently but firmly took his arm. They're helping you leave, I said calmly. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Collins off my property. The moment the security guards led Liam and Chloe away, a strange silence fell over the lobby. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, thick with the ghosts of unspoken words and years of quiet suffering. Mr. Harris, the former director, stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief, the color draining from his cheeks. I turned my gaze to him, my expression unreadable. I didn't need to raise my voice. The power shift was a physical presence in the room, a change in the atmospheric pressure. Mr. Harris, I said, my voice calm and even. Your employment, and that of your entire senior administrative team, is terminated, effective immediately. There was no argument, no protest. He simply nodded, a puppet whose strings had been cut. My new security team, professional and discreet, escorted him to his office to gather his personal belongings. There were no dramatic scenes, no shouting matches. It was a quiet, clinical excision of a cancer. That same afternoon, my lawyer David Chen and I sat in what was once Mr. Harris's office. It smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. We didn't waste a moment. The budget for resident care, I announced, looking at the grim spreadsheets on the monitor, is quadrupled, starting now. David raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on his lips. That's an aggressive move, Freya. I shook my head. It's not aggressive, David. It's corrective. It's the baseline of human decency. The changes were immediate and tangible. The next morning, the smell of real butter and freshly baked bread replaced the usual scent of lukewarm oatmeal. The kitchen staff, a new team I had headhunted from a respected catering company, were preparing a menu based on resident requests. I authorized the purchase of new mattresses for every room, physical therapy equipment that wasn't from the last century, and a budget for arts and music programs. I hired a new medical director, a woman named Dr. and Eris Thorne, renowned not for her administrative skills, but for her pioneering work in compassionate geriatric care. My first official act as the new owner wasn't a press release or a corporate memo. It was a walk. I went from room to room, not as an owner, but as a fellow resident. I sat on the edge of beds, held hands, and looked into the eyes of people who had been forgotten. I spoke to Eleanor, whose letters to her grandchildren were never mailed. I found them in a box in the administrative office. I personally drove to the post office and sent them express. I sat with Mr. Henderson, who had been asking for a new deck of playing cards for 6 months, and I opened a fresh pack with him, a quiet apology in the simple act of shuffling. To each of them, I said the same thing. I am so sorry for what you have endured in this place. Things are going to be different now. They didn't need grand promises. They needed to see it, to feel it, to taste it in the food, and feel it in the warmth of a new blanket. The final act of that first week was the most symbolic. I stood on the lawn and watched as a work crew pried the cheap plastic letters of the Golden Years retirement home from the main sign. The name had always been a cruel joke. These were not golden years. They were years of rust and neglect. When the old sign was gone, they mounted the new one. It was made of dark, polished wood, with the name etched in elegant silver script, the Nightingale Sanctuary. The name was a tribute to Arthur, a promise I was keeping. It wasn't a home or an institution. It was a sanctuary, a place of refuge and peace. The story, as stories in the digital age do, broke not like a wave, but like a tsunami. It started with a single verified report from a credible financial journalist that David had strategically leaked. The headline was stark. Ethelred Capital, under new leadership, uncovers billion-dollar fraud scheme linked to founder's family. That was the spark. The internet provided the gasoline. The same news outlets and blogs that had once praised Chloe's saintly TikToks, sharing her carefully staged videos of compassion, now turned on her with a righteous fury. They dug up the old posts, juxtaposing them with the grim realities of the legal filings. Her image as the devoted daughter-in-law shattered, replaced by the portrait of a sociopathic grifter. Her social media pages, once a monument to her ego, became a digital pillory. The comment sections were a torrent of outrage and disgust. "I can't believe I ever liked this," one read. "My grandmother is in a place like this. This makes me sick." The narrative was irresistible. The stolen ring, the lonely Thanksgiving dinner, the staged videos, every cruel detail I had endured became a headline, a talking point, a viral thread. Chloe and Liam were not just disgraced, they were eviscerated in the court of public opinion. Their fall was as public and performative as their rise had been. They were hounded by reporters. Their friends vanished. The life they had built on my money and my misery dissolved in a matter of days. David would give me clinical updates. The company was suing them for embezzlement, fraud, and a dozen other charges. The state was pursuing its own criminal investigation for elder abuse and financial exploitation. They lost the mansion, of course. It was never theirs. It was a corporate asset they had been illegally occupying. Their bank accounts, filled with money siphoned from my trust, were frozen. They were left with nothing but the designer clothes on their backs and a mountain of legal bills that would follow them for the rest of their lives. I felt nothing watching it unfold. No glee, no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. It was simply an equation balancing itself out. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and a single breath of truth had brought it all down. My final victory isn't found in the ruins of their lives. It's not in the cold, cavernous rooms of the mansion I never returned to, a place now scrubbed of their presence and awaiting sale. My peace is here. I'm sitting in what used to be the director's office, but it's been transformed. The heavy mahogany desk is gone, replaced with a warm oak table. The blinds are wide open, and the afternoon sun streams in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The walls are covered, not with corporate charts, but with watercolor paintings done by the residents. From my window, I have a clear view of the gardens. They are no longer just patches of dry grass. We've planted rose bushes and lavender, built a shaded gazebo, and installed a small, gurgling fountain. I watch as Dr. Thorne helps Eleanor, my fellow prisoner, plant a row of tulips. Mr. Henderson is at a table with 3 other men, engaged in a loud, laughing game of poker. I see a young volunteer reading poetry to a woman in a wheelchair, her head tilted, a faint smile on her lips. The air isn't filled with the scent of disinfectant and despair anymore. It smells like soil, and flowers, and fresh brewed iced tea. This is the sound of life, not of waiting for death. I feel no lingering rage towards Liam and Chloe. Their memory is like a bad dream that fades with the morning light. There is only a quiet, resolute peace that settles deep in my bones. It's the peace that comes from creating, not destroying. Arthur would have loved this. He would have understood that the true value of his empire wasn't in the stock prices or the balance sheets, but in its ability to do this. to build a sanctuary. They thought they were being clever. They saw a frail, grieving old woman, a relic to be managed and discarded. They thought they were shoving me into a grave, a place to be forgotten while they lived off my legacy. They never understood the nature of the gift my husband left me. They never realized that in their haste to bury me, they were giving me the keys to the mausoleum. My name is Freya. I was a prisoner here. Now I own the prison, and I have set everyone free.